You know how sometimes you just crave that deeper understanding, that moment where something complex suddenly clicks and the everyday world looks, well, a little different?
Yeah, that aha moment.
Exactly. That's what we're all about here, and today we're diving into the world of Opus Dei.
Work of God in Latin. It's an institution within the Catholic Church founded way back in Spain, 1928, by Josemaria Escrivá.
Right.
And it's a fascinating entity. Its mission is centered on this really powerful idea, finding holiness woven right into the fabric of our daily lives. That goes for both lay members and clerical members.
Right. It's about seeing your work, your family life, your ordinary interactions,
Hmm.
seeing them as ways to, well, grow spiritually.
Hmm.
We've gathered a good amount of source material today. We'll be drawing mainly from the extensive information available publicly to really get at the core of Opus Dei. What was its original vision? How's it evolved? And, what are some of the key things that still spark discussion?
Exactly. And it's important to note, this isn't some fringe movement. Opus Dei holds a unique and official status within the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Back in 1982, Pope John Paul II granted it the status of a personal prelature.
Okay, personal prelature. We hear that term. Maybe instead of just defining it, we can think about what that structure lets Opus Dei do. Something a more traditional setup wouldn't.
That's a really key point. A personal prelature, essentially, it allows for a global pastoral focus. It's under the direct authority of its own prelate, say.
Ah, okay.
Regardless of the usual geographical diocesan boundaries, think of it like a structure tailored for a specific spiritual mission.
Right, right.
In this case, emphasizing sanctifying secular life. It transcends local church admin, but it's still fully within the Catholic Church. It just centralizes leadership for their specific charism, their gift.
Interesting. So a structure really built for a worldwide mission with a particular focus. Now, it's no secret Opus Dei sparks, well, a lot of different reactions. It's a topic that comes with its share of controversies, criticisms, too. We want to make sure we're exploring the whole picture here.
Agreed. Yeah, a thorough look means engaging with all the perspectives, understanding the complexities.
Okay, let's go back to the beginning then. Madrid, October 2nd, 1928. Josemaria Escrivá has this foundational experience, this seeing of Opus Dei, as they put it.
Mm-hmm.
The name itself, Work of God, is so declarative. He really believed this wasn't just his idea, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Escrivá consistently talked about the supernatural origin. He felt he was just an instrument, in God's hands. It's interesting, the initial scope.
Yeah.
It began just with men, but very quickly, 1930, women were also included,
Right.
reportedly because of another perceived divine communication. This early inclusion of women right from the start, it's pretty distinctive.
And those early years in Spain, tumultuous, to say the least. The Civil War. Escrivá faced real danger. How did that period shape things?
Well, the experience of persecution and Escrivá needing to be discreet, it undoubtedly instilled a certain, maybe cautiousness.
Sure, makes sense.
But even during that time, the core message, finding God in the everyday, kept developing. And the publication of The Way in 1939.
Ah, yes, the 999 Maxims.
Exactly. Those short maxims for lay spirituality, it really solidified a practical guide for living this out, even when things were tough.
And then after the war, the growth was pretty significant, both in Spain and internationally. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it? Escrivá himself mentioned opposition. What kind of resistance was there early on?
Well, he faced skepticism from different places. Some who he called enemies of personal freedom. Maybe they saw his focus on personal responsibility and initiative as like a challenge to more traditional structures.
Correct.
Others, more conservative within the church, might have been a bit wary of this new approach to lay spirituality. It wasn't centered on monasteries or being ordained.
Right.
This whole idea of seeking holiness out in the secular world was a relatively new emphasis then.
So moving the headquarters to Rome in the 40s sounds like a strategic move.
Seems likely.
And the Vatican's approval followed 1947, then definitively in 1950, allowing married members, diocesan priests, to join. That really integrated Opus Dei into the wider church.
It did.
Now, the connection to the Franco regime in Spain often comes up. Can we unpack that a bit more carefully?
Yeah, it's true that some Opus Dei members held ministerial positions under Franco, but it's really crucial to understand that this doesn't mean the entire organization officially endorsed the regime.
Right.
Membership in Opus Dei doesn't dictate politics. There were definitely diverse views among members back then, just like in any large group. Saying it was blanket political support is just an oversimplification.
That's an important distinction. Okay, let's fast forward. 1975, Escrivá passes away, Álvaro del Portillo takes over. Then that big shift in 82, the personal prelature. We touched on the structure, but what did that recognition really mean for Opus Dei, for its identity, its mission in the church?
Well, it was a formal Vatican recognition of Opus Dei's unique charism, that specific gift, that emphasis on lay spirituality and sanctifying work. It provided a clear canonical framework for their global apostolate, directly under the Pope through their own prelate. It essentially affirmed and solidified their distinct way of being church.
Then Escrivá's canonization in 2002, that's a major statement by the church, but like you said, not without controversy. Why did that sainthood process stir up debate?
Well, sainthood processes often involve intense scrutiny. They can attract both strong support and strong opposition for all sorts of reasons, theological, historical, even political sometimes.
Sure.
In Escrivá's case, some of the criticisms aimed at Opus Dei as an organization inevitably became part of the discussion about whether he should be a saint.
Yeah.
But, the huge number of people, 300,000, who showed up for his canonization, that certainly speaks to the devotion he inspired.
Yeah, that's a huge crowd.
And the fact that beatification processes for other members started afterwards, people from all walks of life, it underscores that idea that holiness is for everyone.
Seeing that list, a pediatrician, a student, a domestic worker, it really brings that universal call idea down to earth, doesn't it?
It really does.
We also saw Opus Dei members appointed as cardinals. What does that suggest about their standing, within the Vatican?
Well, appointing members to such high-ranking positions definitely indicates a level of influence and integration. It suggests their perspectives and contributions are valued at the highest levels of the Catholic Church.
And then Pope Benedict XVI, he continued to show strong support. It's interesting how consistently the modern popes have viewed Escrivá's teachings positively, especially pushing back against that idea that holiness is just for a select few.
Yes. Benedict XVI really saw Escrivá as articulating something crucial about Christian life, that the path to God isn't just in grand gestures, but in the ordinary things done with love and dedication. He saw it as sort of a corrective to maybe an elitist view of sanctity.
Then the Da Vinci Code happened.
Ah, yes.
That really pushed Opus Dei into the spotlight, but through a very specific, fictional, and pretty dark lens. What was the real-world impact of that portrayal?
Oh, it undeniably shaped public perception for a huge number of people. If you didn't know anything about Opus Dei, that sensationalized, often inaccurate picture in the book and film, that became your main reference point.
Yeah, I can see that.
It led to misconceptions, fueled existing criticisms. It created a major PR challenge for the organization, really.
Must have been a nightmare. But life went on. Álvaro del Portillo was beatified in 2014. And the organization kept expanding globally.
Yeah, it spread to nearly 70 countries by then, shows the core message still had appeal. The succession of Fernando Ocares as prelate and the beatification of Guadalupe Ortiz de Landazuri, the first lay woman from Opus Dei to be beatified, those marked further milestones recently.
But we can't ignore the darker aspects. The acknowledged cases of sexual abuse in the U.S. and Spain. That's a stark reminder, isn't it, that no institution is immune?
Absolutely. Those cases are incredibly serious, and their public acknowledgement is a significant step, reflecting perhaps a commitment to transparency, however difficult that process is.
And more recently, Pope Francis has issued some pretty significant directives about Opus Dei. That apostolic letter, the Motu Proprio, they seem to signal a shift in its structural relationship with the Vatican. What's the core of those changes?
The main aim seems to be reaffirming Opus Dei's original charism, especially its focus on the laity and integrating faith into daily life.
Yeah.
The change about the prelate not being a bishop and shifting oversight to the dicastery for the clergy,
Right.
those look like moves to align its structure more closely with other similar groups in the church while still respecting its unique nature. Pope Francis has been clear, though, that these weren't meant as negative actions, but rather to safeguard the original spirit.
So a dynamic history, for sure. Now let's get to the heart of it. The spirituality and doctrine guiding Opus Dei members. That universal call to holiness keeps coming up. For someone who thinks holiness is just for monks or nuns, what's the key takeaway?
Well, the core message is that sanctity isn't limited to a specific job or lifestyle. It's a call for every baptized Christian, no matter their state in life. Opus Dei emphasizes that God calls lay people to become holy through their ordinary work, their family life, their friendships, the everyday stuff they live in. It's about striving for love and virtue right in the middle of the world.
And that's a really significant shift in perspective for some people, I imagine. The fact that there are no monks or nuns in Opus Dei, and most members are lay people with regular jobs, families, that really underlines the point.
Exactly. The emphasis is on sanctifying ordinary life, finding God and growing closer to Him through the routine tasks and challenges of each day. Pope John Paul II, calling Escrivá the saint of ordinary life, really captures it.
Work specifically seems really elevated. It's not just making a living, it's a path to holiness. How does that work in their theology?
Opus Dei teaches that work. When you do it confidently and offer it to God with the right intention, it becomes a prayer, a way to get holy. It's seen as participating in God's creative work, contributing to society. They draw from Scripture God's command to work in Genesis, Jesus being a carpenter. It's about bringing your faith into your profession, whatever it is.
The source also mentions divine filiation, this deep sense of being God's children as foundational. How does that shape their spirituality?
Well, seeing yourself as a beloved child of God, it fosters this deep sense of trust, intimacy, and responsibility in your relationship with God.
Right.
It infuses their prayer life, their approach to work, how they interact with others. It's about living with that awareness of God's loving presence in everything.
Beyond these core ideas, there's this framework of freedom, personal responsibility, charity, love. It sounds like a very integrated way to live out Christian faith.
It is. Fernando Ocares, the current prelate, talks about the subjective personal holiness and the objective dimension, which Escrivá called Christian materialism.
Christian materialism, that sounds intriguing.
It is an interesting term. It basically means viewing all of creation, even material things, as potentially leading us to God. So even physical realities can be pathways for spiritual growth.
Now, we also hear about a plan of life or norms of piety that members follow. What kind of practices are we talking about there?
This usually involves a commitment to regular prayer, going to Mass, receiving the sacraments, and other traditional Catholic devotions. It's about setting up a spiritual rhythm to help stay connected to God amidst, a busy life.
Okay.
The specifics can vary, though, depending on the person and their type of membership.
And then there's mortification of the flesh. That can sound a bit archaic. To modern ears, the source mentions fasting, silence. What's the idea behind that?
Mortification in this context isn't really about self-punishment. It's more about developing self-mastery, offering small sacrifices as a way to unite yourself with Christ and grow in virtue.
Okay, I see.
The scriptural basis often cited is Jesus' call to deny oneself. In Opus Dei, these practices are generally integrated into daily life pretty discreetly, ways that fit with your ordinary duties. It's aimed at fostering inner freedom, really.
Okay, so a clearer picture of the spiritual framework is emerging. Now, how is Opus Dei actually organized? How does it function day to day? We know it's a personal prelature, but what does that mean for leadership and structure?
Well, the prelate is the central authority figure guiding the whole prelature. He's advised by two councils, the General Council for Men and the Central Advisory for Women.
Right.
Every 8 years, they have general congresses where members give input on Opus Dei's direction. And the process for electing a new prelate is quite specific. Women nominate, men vote, and the Pope has to confirm the appointment.
That is a unique system. And the membership itself is quite diverse, it seems, not just one type of member.
Exactly. The supernumeraries, mostly married people with secular jobs, they're the largest group, about 70%.
Wow, okay.
Then you have numeraries, who are celibate, often live in Opus Dei centers, and have more availability for the organization's activities. That's maybe 20%. Numerary assistants are women whose professional work is taking care of the domestic needs in those centers. Associates are also celibate, but usually live on their own.
Okay.
And then there are the priests of the Opus Dei prelature itself, about 2%, and diocesan priests in the Priestly Society of the Holy Cross, plus cooperators, people who aren't members but help out.
So a really wide range of commitments and ways to be involved. And in terms of numbers, it's a significant global presence.
Yeah, over 95,000 members worldwide as of a few years ago, mostly lay people. Big presence in Europe, the Americas. And interestingly, the members seem to come from pretty diverse socioeconomic backgrounds.
The main activity seems focused on training and formation, equipping Catholics to live out their faith day to day.
Exactly. They offer seminars, workshops, retreats, classes. But the cornerstone is spiritual direction, that one-on-one guidance to help members grow spiritually.
And that formation covers
Various areas: doctrinal, spiritual, human, professional, and apostolic. how to share the faith.
And we also see these corporate works, schools, universities, training centers, hospitals, a tangible outreach.
Yes, those nonprofits, hundreds globally, reflect Opus Dei's commitment to contributing to society through education and social service based on their core principles. University of Navarra, IE's business school, these are some well-known examples.
Now, throughout its history, Opus Dei has had this close relationship with the church leadership. We mentioned support from popes. Seems like a pretty consistent theme, especially recently.
Yeah, from early nods by bishops to consistent support from Pope Pius XII onwards, there's been general recognition. Pope John Paul II was a particularly strong advocate. He saw Escrivá as key for understanding the role of the laity, an idea really highlighted by Vatican II.
Right.
Even Pope Francis, while making those structural tweaks, has expressed positive feelings towards Opus Dei and its mission.
Which inevitably brings us to the controversies. It's impossible to talk about Opus Dei without acknowledging the criticisms. Secretiveness, recruitment tactics, alleged elitism, those historical links to authoritarian regimes. It's a pretty long list of concerns.
It is, and these criticisms have definitely shaped public perception and fueled ongoing debate. Allegations of secretiveness, undue influence, those have been persistent themes. Recruitment methods, the level of commitment asked, those have also drawn scrutiny.
And those historical connections, especially Franco's Spain, they remain a sticking point for many.
Yes. While some members held power, like we said, it's important not to generalize about everyone. The relationship was complex. Attributing uniform support for the regime across all members just isn't accurate. There were members who opposed Franco too.
Then there are the accusations of elitism and the more recent, very serious allegations about how numerary assistants were treated. Those are significant challenges to their reputation.
Absolutely. These are serious issues that need careful attention. The allegations about numerary assistants, especially, raise very important questions.
But we also need to acknowledge the other side, the differing views on these criticisms. Some journalists, scholars, they argue many negative portrayals are based on misinformation or misunderstanding.
Right.
They emphasize the organization's transparency, the personal responsibility of its lay members.
Yes, there are voices arguing that claims of secretiveness are unfounded, given the public info available. They'd say criticisms often stem from not understanding Opus Dei's specific charism or the autonomy lay members have in their secular lives. The diversity of membership is also used to counter the elitism claims. Sociologists have even framed Opus Dei as an attempt to blend Catholic tradition with modern life.
It's a real spectrum of perspectives, isn't it? It really highlights the complexity of understanding any large, multifaceted group with a long history.
Indeed, and that reference to Vatican II's teachings on the Church in the modern world. It gives a theological context for understanding how Opus Dei engages with secular society.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've covered the founding, the spirituality, the structure, its relationship with the church, and yes, the controversies surrounding Opus Dei. It's clearly a complex and often debated institution.
Yes, definitely. But its core mission, finding holiness in the everyday, that remains a central and for many a potentially very meaningful concept.
And it's equally clear there are very different ways of viewing and understanding Opus Dei. It's a good reminder, really, of how important it is to engage with multiple perspectives when trying to understand any complex issue.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. How does this idea, finding holiness in your own daily work and life, how does that resonate with you? What might be the real-world implications, the challenges, the possibilities of embracing that kind of perspective in your own context?
Definitely something to think about.
Something to consider as you go about your day.
Definitely food for thought. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Opus Dei.